修，所以大家如果有什么问题，一会儿都 feel free to ask。对，他这个人非常非常 nice 和 friendly， 所以大家都可以和他做朋友的。
老师们、学生们，大家好！我是非常荣幸到布朗大学 Echo Symposium 给一个演讲，关于我的曾外祖父孙中山先生的建国方略。The title of my speech is World Trends, Sun Yat-sen and the International Development of China. This is a picture of Sun Yat-sen when he was 17 years old, and he returned from Honolulu to Hong Kong. And this is Song Qingling's favorite picture of Sun Yat-sen. And this is my picture. Some people think that I have a resemblance to my great-grandfather, but I don't think I got his expression quite right, so let me try again. How about this one? My mother, you're probably curious about my relation to Sun Yat-sen. My mother is the third granddaughter of Sun Yat-sen, the third daughter of Dr. Sun Fo or Sun He-shen. And this picture was taken in Taipei, Yangmingshan during the late 1960s. Sun He returned to Taiwan from 1965 to 1973 and worked as the Kaosu Yuan Yuanzang. This is a family picture in Honolulu, Hawaii, in 1970 when my grandfather came to visit us. And this picture is very special to me because this is the only picture that I have with my grandfather. Can you guess which one is me in the picture?
Left.
最小的吧？你猜对了。Okay, so on the right is my uncle, 是申克最大的儿子申日平。在他的右手是我的父亲，我的外公，我的母亲，我的哥哥。And this is a picture of Sun Yat-sen and Sun He in Honolulu in 1910. This was Sun Yat-sen's last trip to Honolulu, Hawaii. And the Sun family has a very deep connection with Hawaii. In 1879, Sun Yat-sen traveled to Honolulu with his mother when he was just 12 and a half years old. And he could not speak a single word of English. But in less than 3 years' time, he was to be able to gain such a mastery of English that he was able to win second prize in an English grammar competition. And he was given a prize by King David Kalakaua, the king of Hawaii at the time. On November 24th, 1894, Sun Yat-sen established his first revolutionary organization in Hawaii, the Shinzonghui, and became China's first revolutionary. So Hawaii is the birthplace of the modern Chinese Revolution. Do you all know this history?
Yeah.
你们都学过这个中国现代化的革命是在夏威夷发源的。Very good.
But I don't know why.
OK， 因为孙中山是在夏威夷成立兴中会，是他的第一个革命会，所以1894年11月24号，孙中山是在夏威夷成立兴中会，他的第一个革命会，所以夏威夷算是这个中国现代化的革命的发源地，其实这个原因。
我是想知道为什么不在中国本土找一个地方成立，而跑到海外呢？
对，因为它是跟夏威夷有密切关系的，是 like Hawaii is like a base for him. He grew up in Hawaii. He was educated in Hawaii. 是孙中山是在夏威夷长大的，受教育的。 So it's like a base for him, or a place that's very familiar to him. So the reason why he established the Shimzong Hui in Honolulu was he wrote a letter to Li Hongzhang, who is the Governor General or the Premier of China, and he was advocating that the Qing dynasty reform. And then he and Lu Haodong went to Beijing to personally deliver this letter to Li Hongzhang, but they were just completely rebuffed, because孙中山是从农民家出来的，所以李鸿章问你是谁？你是农民家，我不理你，就是看不起，不理你，你是谁？你 you wanna tell me what to do? Then 就是不理。So 孙中山 said there's only one way to save China， 只有一个方法来救中国，这个方法就是革命。This is the bronze statue of Sun Yat-sen in Honolulu, Chinatown, and the pedestal is designed by me, and 是一个八角形的底座。为什么我是设计一个八角形的底座呢？因为在孙中山的三民主义、民族主义，他第一个主义是民族主义，中华民族主义。第六章他讲，我们要复兴我们的固有的道德的文化，做新中国的基础。这个固有道德的文化就是孔子的儒家思想，这个大学，八德跟八目，忠孝仁爱信义和平，歌舞致知诚意正信，修身齐家治国平天下。So it's a system of cultivation, a nugget of wisdom that is unsurpassed by any other culture. And he wanted to teach the Chinese people to revive this cultural heritage, because he said that if we all practice this system of cultivation, then China can easily become strong within a very short amount of time. So the other reason why I designed the pedestal with 8 faces 是会放很多内容，所以是3层8面，所以有24个面会放内容的。So it's like a teaching tool. So every October 10th, November 12th, and March 12th of each year, the Chinese community gathers at this bronze statue of Sun Yat-sen to pay tribute to him by putting flower leis on the statue. And this is another statue that I donated in Maui, in the Maui 岛是有一个中山公园，我是捐这个孙中山的头像跟底座。And then I'm climbing up the ladder to put a flower lei on the statue. And this is another statue in Maui that I donated in the Chinese Heritage Garden. This is a picture of my mother with her book of her grandfather, with her own personal collection of photographs that she collected of her grandfather since she was 9 years old. 是孙中山纪念集, and I've donated a hard copy edition, hardback copy edition of this to the Watson Institute's library. So if you would like to go and see it, you can find it in the Watson Institute. And in the picture on the right is a statue of Sun Yat-sen in the Shenzhen Zhongshan Gongyuan. In 在中国每一个大的城市有中山路跟中山公园，孙中山的名字非常有名。可是今天就是一个空的名字而已， 没有他的精神。I myself have been studying my great-grandfather's teachings since I was young, reading every book that I could find in the library about him. And I wanted to understand his teachings and his vision for the future of China. And what I've come to understand more than anything else is his deep love for the Chinese nation and for the Chinese people. And this is something that I would like to share with all of you here today. On September 15th, 1916, Sun Zong-san went to inspect the completion of the Qiantang River Bridge near Hangzhou, and he went to watch the tide come in. And he had a very strong feeling and said, 世界潮流浩浩汤汤，孙子之强，逆之之亡. For more than 20 years, Sun Zong-san lived on 3 different continents across the world and was fluent in both English and in Chinese. He was the most well-read, most well-traveled man of his times. This unique background enabled him to grasp world trends, to understand their force, and to crystallize them into practical programs which would later shape China and the world. I would like all of you to remember this. This is the first map of Sun Zong-san's first world tour. How many of you know that Sun Zong-san traveled all around the world? Okay, so very few people during his time traveled as much as he did. And the reason why he traveled so widely was after the first 他的第一个广州起义失败以后，他是把他的革命传到这个国际上，这个海外的华侨的所有的地区，在亚洲、北美跟西欧。So he lived on 3 different continents from 1895 to 1911. And here you can see him leaving from Hong Kong to Tokyo, Japan, stopping by Honolulu to San Francisco, then across the United States to New York, then to London, where he was kidnapped in London in 1896. And then he made a tour of Western Europe, Brussels, Paris, Berlin, and then back to London. And in his second world tour, you can see him coming back from London, across to Toronto, Canada, across the Canadian continent to Vancouver, then to Japan. Then his third world tour, from Japan back to Honolulu, across the United States, to Europe, through the Middle East, the Suez Canal, the Indian Ocean, down to Singapore, Vietnam, and then back up to Japan. So Sun Zong-san was a world traveler, and his friend, a Japanese friend, Ki Inukai, called him the first international citizen in the history of the world, and the first international statesman in the history of the world. This is his 4th world trip. His 5th world trip. And then on his 6th world trip, he was in Denver, Colorado on October 10th. 这个武昌起义的时候，孙中山是在电华, which is Denver, Colorado, and from there he traveled to New York and then back to China. This is a picture of Yuan Shikai and Sun Zong-san. Sun Zong-san was the first democratically elected president in China's history. And he was elected to be the provisional president of the Republic of China, the first republic in Asia. And then Yuan Shikai held military power through the Qing dynasty armies, and he wanted to be appointed as the president. So Sun Zong-san made an agreement with Yuan Shikai that if he could make the Puyi emperor abdicate, he would resign the presidency in favor of Yuan Shikai. And then he wanted to be the railroad minister in China to concentrate on China's economic development. So beginning in 1912, Sun Zhongshan started researching and planning China's strategic industrial infrastructure. How many of you have heard of Sun Zhongshan的建国方略? Anyone? 没有人听说过吗? Okay. 所以建国方略是 Plans for National Reconstruction. But can you think of a better English translation for 建国方略? 建国是什么意思? Nation building. 建国是 nation building. Right, 方略是 strategy. So a better English title for 建国方略 could be Strategy for Nation Building. Does it sound interesting to you? Okay. So 建国方略有三部分，第一部分是商文学说，第二部分是事业计划 Plans for Industry and Commerce， 第三部分是心理建设。And then 事业计划 was translated into English, and the English title is called the International Development of China. So how many of you have heard of the International Development of China? The one person, that's great. Okay, so the International Development of China, can anybody guess when it was published? 建国方略是1919年出版的，所以这个事业计划英文版是在1920年出版的。Okay, I first found the International Development of China when I was a college student at Occidental College in Los Angeles, and I picked it up and I started reading it, and what I read both shocked me and amazed me. And I asked myself, what am I reading? In the international development of China, Sun Yat-sen was to make many predictions that were to come true decades into the future and are still being realized in China and the world today. 所以这个是孙中山的建国方略图，他自己亲手设计的。If you look carefully, you can see these red dots along the coastline. These are ports connected by railways into China's interior. So the hallmark feature of Sun Zhongshan的建国方略图 is 这个东岸的港口跟这个铁路连起来。往西走到这个中国的内部。So this is how Sun Yat-sen strategically envisioned how to develop China. Sun Zhongshan lived during one of the darkest periods in Chinese history, when the existence of China as a nation and as a people was threatened by Western imperialism and Japanese militarism. So in this picture you can see like Queen Victoria, Bismarck of Germany, the Tsar of Russia, the French lady, and the Japanese samurai. These are the five great powers that wanted to carve up China. 是这些国家要把中国划分做他们的殖民地。So by 1910, China had already been carved up into different spheres of influence, which Sun Yat-sen called hypocolonies, 半殖民地. So you can see the different parts of China, like the Liaodong Peninsula, the Yangtze River Valley, Guangdong, Guangxi, Yunnan. There are different spheres of influence of France, Britain, Germany, Japan, and Russia. Shandong is the German sphere of influence. and then in the far northeast 在东北是这个俄罗斯的sphere of influence. Sun Zhongshan wrote The International Development of China in reaction to the Treaty of Versailles, which concluded World War I, but betrayed China and gave the Shandong Peninsula to Japan. More than 2,000 students from different universities in Beijing came out to protest Japan's 21 demands on China, giving rise to Chinese popular nationalism. Without the skilled manpower provided by 100,000 Chinese contract laborers to Britain and France, the Allies could not have won the war against Germany. And then Sun Zhongshan said that the Allies had betrayed China, and that if imperialism was not changed from the mind frames of the leaders of the industrialized nations, it would create the coming of the Great Second World War. 所以孙中山讲，要是这个帝国主义的国家不改变他们的思想，从帝国主义到国际经济合作，会再发生一个第二世界大战。To prevent the coming of the Great Second World War, Sun Zhongshan argued that industrialized nations, instead of spending billions of US dollars to raise armies and navies to conquer foreign countries in order to exploit their land, labor, and natural resources, the same amount of money could be invested into China productively to develop China's resources and markets for the good of the whole world and the Chinese people in particular. In the preface to the International Development of China, Sun Yat-sen states, as soon as the armistice, that's the peace treaty, was declared in the recent World War, I began to take up the study of the international development of China and to form programs accordingly. I was prompted to do so by my desire to contribute my humble part in the realization of world peace. China, a country possessing a territory of 4,289,000 square miles and a population of 400 million people, and the richest mineral and agricultural resources in the world, is now prey to the militaristic and capitalistic powers, a greater bone of contention in the Balkan Peninsula. Unless the Chinese question can be solved peacefully, another world war greater and more terrible than the one just passed will be inevitable. And in the conclusion to the International Development of China, Sun Zhongshan writes, international war is nothing more than pure and simple organized robbery on a grand scale, which all right-minded people deplore. The scramble for territories, the struggle for food, the fighting for raw materials will begin anew. So instead of disarmament, there's going to be a greater increase in the armies and navies of the once allied powers for the next war. China, the most rich and populous country in the world, will be the prize. Now, the militaristic policy of Japan is to swallow China alone. Although people thought of Sun Zhongshan as being very idealistic in his vision, he was very practical in his means, and he established Huangpu Zhenxiao. How many of you know this history? 所以要是孙中山没有成立这个黄埔军校，中国没有这个现代化的部队的。Do you see that? So, Huangpu Zhenxiao was the military academy of the Republic of China, which produced many prestigious commanders who fought in many of China's conflicts during the 20th century, notably the Northern Expedition, the Second Sino-Japanese War, and the Chinese Civil War. So this is Sun Zhongshan, Song Qingling, Jiang Jieshi standing on the stage, and Sun Zhongshan is giving a speech addressing the cadets of Huangpu Zhenxiao. And then you can see this is Sun Zhongshan's writing in the background, Qing Ai Jing Ceng. And then Jing Ceng, what does Jing Ceng mean? It means to be extremely sincere. Okay? So he was sending the cadets on a mission to unite China. He wanted everyone to be sincere in that mission. And then another picture of Sun Song-san, Jiang Jieshi, He Yingjing, and another general. Who can tell me who this is? Zhou Enlai. Very good. And then 你看周恩来是穿什么样的制服呢？国民党，对，这个是中华革命军的制服 ，Chinese Revolutionary Army。所以你可以看这个蒋介石跟周恩来都是穿一样的制服。Do you know the reason why?
No.
大军阀，北伐。
是这个共产党的党员，他们都是加入国民党的，所以they were all part of the 国民党 under Sun Song-san, and Sun Song-san appointed Jiang Jieshi to be the 黄埔军校的校长。Sun Song-san also appointed Zhou Enlai to be 黄埔军校的政治部的主任。And then Zhou Enlai, Hu Hanming, Wang Jingwei, and even Mao Zedong were all part of 黄埔军校的政治部。Did you know that? 所以他们都是跟着孙中山的革命的。Okay, who's this? 林彪。Okay, 林彪穿什么样的制服？也是国民党的制服。
Yeah, you mean that Lin Biao has ever been Huangpu Military Academy?
Yes, I believe so. And
啊？
这是林彪吗？你们有没有觉得奇怪？你看林彪穿这个国民党的制服。Is that strange? Not strange, okay. 所以你们觉得林彪是坏人吗？在你们的历史上，你们觉得林彪是什么样的人呢？啊？是 brilliant general. The Northeast campaign. 是林彪把这个东北打赢的嘛？是蒋介石派他的中央军到东北去，后来是被林彪打掉的嘛。So he has so much contribution to the communist revolution, and then他是国防部长嘛，the head of the military, and I think in your history he's a criminal. I don't really think so. Okay. 这是谁？叶剑英。叶剑英也是跟着孙中山的革命的。叶剑英是广东客家人，孙中山也是广东客家人的。Ye Jingyin was to later engineer Deng Xiaoping's return to power, such that he could implement 改革开放 starting in Guangdong first. That was a secret agreement between Ye Jingyin and Deng Xiaoping. Ye Jingyin made a scathing criticism of the Cultural Revolution, and he said that 这个文革是豪杰灾难 and then 他讲。中国一定要改革开放，所以这个改革开放开始要在广东开始，因为叶剑英是广东生长。 He's the governor of Guangdong. Okay, so more than 12 years after Sun Song-san's death, his prediction was to come true. And on July 7th, 1937, Japan began its full-scale invasion of China. 这个是卢沟桥事变，日本开始全面侵略中国。Then the 19th Group Army, Shujulu Jun, was one of the units that was independent of Jiang Jiechi's command. Is actually Guangdong troops. The reason why I mentioned the 19th Group Army is because my grandfather, Sun Ke, called the 19th Group Army in from Guangzhou to defend Shanghai against the Japanese invaders. And it was one of the main units defending Shanghai, where some of the heaviest fighting of the war took place. The 19th Group Army of Cantonese troops fought valiantly from house to house, rooftop to rooftop, block to block, to defend Shanghai from the Japanese. And just in case you're wondering, 这是中年期的僧客，晚年期的僧客。Jiang Jiechi ordered his best troops to fight to the death to defend Shanghai from the Japanese invaders. In the end, his best troops were destroyed, from which he was never able to recover. The National Army was exhausted and short of supplies and unable to defend Nanjing. Nanjing fell on December 13th, 1937, and in revenge for the strong resistance encountered in the Battle of Shanghai, the Japanese troops engaged in a murderous rampage, raping, looting, and killing 300,000 innocent civilians within a period of 3 weeks. 所以你们都有学过，这个世界历史的吧 ，World History。所以在你们的教科书里面，你们学的这个第二世界大战是在什么地方发源的呢？哪一年？39年，对。所以这个是对我们中国人是非常不合理。This history is a terrible, terrible insult to all Chinese. This is the history that you learn in China from your textbooks. What is wrong with this history? It's Eurocentric history. History from the European perspective, European point of view. 所以这个德国侵略波兰，德国人杀波兰人是很重要的。这个日本侵略中国，这个是不重要的，所以不算是这个第二世界大战的发源的。The truth is, World War II had two theaters. It had the Pacific Theater and the European Theater. The Pacific Theater started with Japan's full-scale invasion of China on July 7th, 1937. The European Theater started more than 2 years later on September 1st, 1939. And then the Pacific Theater spread all the way to Hawaii, where the Japanese attacked the United States at Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, bringing America's entry into the war. Once America entered into the war, the two regional wars became merged into World War II, but it started with the Pacific Theater in China. So I want you to remember all of this. 所以你可以看到，从你们的自己的历史上，是这个是中国人看不起自己的中国人，崇拜外国人。We study we admire the Western history. Whatever the Westerners say, that is the truth. That's the history. What does our own Chinese say? What did Sun Song-san say? Sun Song-san said that World War II would begin in China at the hands of the Japanese militarists. Do you find that amazing? Sun Song-san 是1925年过世的。 他过世了12年后，日本全面侵略中国，他怎么会知道的呢 ？How could he know that? What I'm going to show you is that Sun Zong-san can foresee things decades into the future. Not only 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, but 80 and 90 years into the future. And that 这个都是在他的 International Development of China 里面的。这个坚果大爷的电影你们都看过了吗？所以这个坚果大爷的电影开始的时候有蒋介石跟毛泽东站在这个中华民国的很大的国旗底下，有一个记者问了他们，今天是不是一个很特别的日子？为什么你们2个人都是穿中山装 ？The actual history of this event is from Patrick Hurley, who is the personal representative of President Roosevelt, to mediate a truce between the Kuomintang and the Gongcantang in China. And when Patrick Hurley met Mao, he asked Mao, 为什么你是穿这个中山装的 And then 毛泽东回答 Hurley, 国共两党继承的是孙中山先生的民主革命的衣钵，同宗同源，春时相依。中山先生的传人都是穿中山装。今天你也会看到我也是穿中山装，因为我也是孙中山的传人，我也是孙中山的弟子。毛泽东讲，蒋介石是